One of the many things I'm sure all of us are very aware of is the constant barrage of little annoying, biting little questions where they bring up Epstein, or they talk about Renee Good, or they talk about how evil capitalism is, and they'll call you a fascist without knowing what fascism is. And if you just ask basic questions, you can catch them off guard because they don't know the meanings behind the words that they use. And if they do, they're using a different meaning than the one that you're using. So, but let's start simple. So, the one that I hear quite frequently is they'll always invoke Epstein and insisting that Trump and Epstein were best friends, being enemies, but they don't care. But what you can do is, because what they're going to do is they're going to try to appeal to, the children. Think about the children. Okay, let's talk about the children. There are still 233,000 children missing from across the border, being smuggled, being drug muled, or being used as a prop to, a lot of them falsely claim that these children were theirs and they weren't. They're complete strangers. And so there's still a lot of children still missing. And a question you can ask them is, how are we going to find them? What are you going to do? What are you going to do to go find those children that are still missing? Without ICE or DHS, how are we going to do that? We're just going to just band together or like, how do you, if you cared about children, you would actually be supporting ICE because they're the ones that would find them, and along with DHS. So it's incoherent. You say you claim to care about children with one breath, but if you bring up another instance where children are being victimized, they don't seem to care. So you can point out that double standard. I'd be surprised if they had an answer, but I'm curious to know how they would respond to that, because I've never gotten a coherent, direct answer to it because it's a good question. Another one is, of course, we're all Nazis. Everyone's a Nazi, and all you have to say is go, no, I'm a liberal. Because Hitler, the Nazis hated liberalism. They did not believe that the individual was above the state. They did not believe in private property. They did not believe in voluntary exchange. Hitler was quite clear when he said he was a national socialist. And along with that, too, with being a Nazi, because National Socialism was kind of an amalgamation, and he fused two worlds that weren't really meant to be. He took nationalism from the right, the liberals, and he took socialism from the communists, the socialists, and he merged them together. And then on top of that, he inserted his own bizarre Aryan pseudo religion. So Nazism is very unique. There really hasn't been another thing like it, before it or after. So being a Nazi is a very specific thing. And if you say, no, I'm not a socialist, I can't be a Nazi, I'm not a socialist, I'm a liberal. Because they'll call you a Nazi, but then they use the term neoliberal as a pejorative. Um, and what a neoliberal is like a Margaret Thatcher, a Ronald Reagan, someone who wants to reduce regulations in the free market. So kind of go back to the more less regulated kind of John Locke economics, where it was more not complete laissez-faire capitalism, but significantly reduced. Let the free market do its thing without so much government involved. That's what a neoliberal is. And they use that as a pejorative. So they'll call you a neoliberal with one breath, but then they'll call you a Nazi. And Nazis were socialists who didn't like capitalism. So it's incoherent. So you can address that incoherent comparison or label. Another thing too, which is kind of going in a different direction, is where they're getting their morals and their ethics from, right? So one thing that socialists will insist on, because they find this to be the key flaw in capitalism, is that it tends to push people out to the fringes, because not everyone's going to be successful. There's going to be a hyper minority of successful people due to something called Price's Law, where 10% of any form of production generates 50% of the output. So in every company, and this isn't just exclusive to businesses or economics, Price's Law applies to everything. Hyper minority of a thing that produces the most amount of that given um, domain. So a good example I like to use is back in the 18th century, the 1700s, there was a lot of classical composers. But if I were to ask you to name one, you would either say Mozart, Bach, Beethoven. Maybe a few of you would know Tchaikovsky, some of the Russian composers. But I mean, I'm sure there were hundreds of classical composers, maybe even thousands all across Europe, writing great music. How come we only know about, I don't know, I would be surprised if the average person could name more than two or three. And there's a reason for that. It's because those were the ones that were the ones that were the most popular because they generated the most. This happens in companies. This happens with people in your family. You know that there's always going to be these people who are much more disciplined, have much more willpower, and are just conscientious, and they're very hard workers, and they produce. And then, at any given job, then you think about the other people that are just paycheck. This principle is universal. So I got way off topic, but I had to explain that because they'll criticize capitalism for pushing people out to the fringes and the margins. And it's true. It does. But with that comes an ethical assumption that pushing people out to the fringes who are less successful is a bad thing. Where's that coming from? Why is that a bad thing? Why is it bad that a hyper minority who works the hardest gets the most, and the people who don't work at all don't get anything at all? From what ethical frame are you basing that off of? And where I'm going with this is that is a Christian concept. The idea that you should care for the poor. Charity is so any appeal to these sort of ethical standards, challenge them on where they're getting that from. Oh, people are disenfranchised and they're on the margins and they're poor. Why is that a bad thing? From an ethical perspective, why should I consider that to be bad? If we're all just monkeys, if we're just highly of animals, why isn't pursuing wealth when it disadvantages somebody else, why is that a bad thing? Evolution is survival of the fittest, right? You think the organisms that, if you believe in evolution, the organisms that were trying to evolve, you think that they were letting other people cut in front of them in the line? Oh, and the genetic line? No, it's competition. It's if I get more things, even if that means taking from you, that's good, according to evolution. So what ethical framework, what deontological grounding are you using? Where are you getting your ethics from? Who says that people who are poor is bad? I mean, these things in the olden, like the Greeks and the Romans, they believed that the people who were born into power, the people did so because the gods willed it. To them, it was common sense. Yeah, There's rich people because God's put them there, and there's poor people who just are the peasants and they are our slaves, and their purpose is to serve people above them. To them, that was ethical. So any ethics that they try to use against you, just ask them where they're getting it from. Who says that that's bad? And a Christian can go, "Oh, it's bad because it's in the Bible." If we just gonna want to get super simplistic, why is this bad? Because it's in the Bible. Christians don't have to wrestle with this. Why is this bad? What makes this good? We have a book that does all that for us. We have it in easy mode. They're the ones that have to justify their worldview, because if you're not on the rock mass, you're on the sand. Those are the only two possibilities. There is not a third option there. You're either on the rock mass, which is on Jesus, or you're sinking in sand. So that's another thing that you can challenge too, is when they try to levy moral crimes. Just ask them, why is that bad? Where are you getting that from? So there's more questions that they'll throw out there to try and catch conservatives off guard. Oh, I'll end with this one. So that DJ radio guy, who I've heard him a couple of times now, he'll say Matthew 24, and he'll quote Jesus saying, when I was hungry, you fed me. When I was naked, you clothed me. That's Matthew 25, not 24. Matthew 24 is about the end times, how things are going to be before he comes back, how bad it's going to get. Woe to pregnant women because you're going to have to flee to the mountains. That's Matthew 24. So this DJ is an idiot, and we need to be better to put him in his place to make him look like an idiot in front of everybody. And all it takes is a few careful but poignant questions. So, if you can think of ones that I haven't talked about yet, if you have a question like, well, what if they ask me this question? I want to hear it. So let me know if you want to know how to, what counter arguments to use against their arguments. So, yeah, I think that would be a good exercise. Let me know what questions you would want to have answered to frequent annoying questions. So, thank you.